Welcome to episode 44 of Talking Prisoner. It is that time of the month again. It is Coral's Soapbox. Welcome, Coraldrouyn.
Hello, Matt. Hello, everybody. I'm going to get straight on my soapbox this morning.
Or straight on it.
Or this afternoon, or this evening, or tonight if you're watching in another country. And talk about characters. Now, you can't tell a story without characters. So many of you who love Prisoner and all other soaps, because we're about all soaps on this particular little segment that I'm doing, say, oh, you know, the story didn't work because such and such or that, or the writers buggered it up or whatever. It's character, character, character. You cannot tell a story. You try and tell a story. You try to tell me your life story, any of you, without it involving a character. You can't. You're always going to start with, it's about this man, or it's about this woman, or it's about this kid who did such and such and such and such. Matt's just pitched me an idea and said, it's about this such and such who is a, and without that, he could not tell me the story. So I'm going to talk about characters today, and I'm going to talk about how we create them, why we create them, why some work better than others, why they don't always have the happy endings you want, and what goes into making a memorable, that's a good word, isn't it? Memorable. It's hard to say when your teeth are loose. A memorable character. And Matt has told me, which he promised he wouldn't do, he's going to spring one on me that I didn't know about. So go for it, Matt. Who are you going to spring on me?
I know you've got your ones you're going to discuss, but one I do want to talk to you about, which a lot of fans talk about, and it's all over the internet, is Cynthia Leach. Now, not a massive character.
Was she in my time?
Well, she was, yeah. She was played by Beverly Dunn, who unfortunately we lost last year.
Yeah, now, well, good luck, because I can't even remember her.
Can't remember. Okay. Well, she was first class as Cynthia Druin.
Oh, yes, I remember. Yes, she was called Cynthia Druin because we thought it was funny at the time.
Yeah. So she was first introduced in episode 481. Now,
it's definitely my time then.
Yeah, but a fact about Beverly Dunn was she actually had 4 roles on Prisoner. Now, she played Ethel Warner, who was Lynn Warner's mum. She also played Mrs. Mitchell, but she also played Irene Henderson, who was one of the visitors when Lassa Fever was on.
Right.
Yes. But Cynthia Leach, how come she wasn't a character that was put into Prisoner more permanently? She was just like this, like Joan Ferguson's apprentice as such. Sorry, it was like Joan Ferguson was her apprentice. Cynthia Leach seemed like such a scary character. And it was
probably because, and I really can't remember, she should have been on my list of characters I created, but she wasn't. So all I can think is that, number one, you can't have, when you've got an antagonist like Maggie Kirkpatrick, you can't undercut that character and that actress by bringing in someone who is even more evil or even more full on than she is. Because your bread and butter characters are the ones that carry the show. And Joan Ferguson is one of those characters that carried the show. Right. In fact, I find it really interesting to note that on your Talking Prisoner interviews, the Maggie Kirkpatrick interview views outnumbers Val Lehman by about 2 to 1. So, you know, more people wanted to hear from the freak than wanted to hear from B, which I found quite astonishing, because I didn't think it would be that high. But the freak is an iconic character. Imagine if you brought in if you kept someone who was more powerful, became more powerful than the freak. A little bit of this is coming back to me now, even as we talk, it's jogging my memory. You can't, if you're going to have a character that comes in and exerts power over the most powerful person that there is there, then you've got to get rid of them in a hurry. You can't keep them there because they undercut the person who you spent 2-3 years building up. So that would be why she was short term, and then get her out, because we use the phrase a lot, which you'll get used to hearing me say, she pulls focus, which means that instead of following the person that we're used to, in this case the freak, we're suddenly going, oh, what's Cynthia up to? Oh, what's going on over there? Which is the one thing you don't want to happen when you are doing 2 hours a week. So that would have been the reason for not keeping her for a long time.
You know what was interesting with Cynthia was you didn't actually see her. You only heard her voice. And then once you
Yes, I know, but still she had more power. Then you got the sense that Joan was a little bit not scared of her, but certainly in awe of her. And you can't have that. You can't have someone in awe. You can't have the freak in awe of someone else, whether we see them or not. Apart from the fact that we've established the freak as a loner, it simply means that there is someone who's more antagonistic than your antagonist. And you can't do that. You simply can't. So short term, yes, you can, if it's for a specific point in a story. Did we ever see her? Did we see?
No. And, you know, I find this character so fascinating because
you didn't see her.
I didn't see her, but also the thoughts that go through your head is like, does she catch up with Joan every few weeks? Are they having dinner together? She's an officer at Blackmore. She's at a more high security prison. She's more brutal than Joan. She's more scarier than Joan, but you didn't see her. She wasn't.
And that's why she was. The minute you'd put a face to her and seen her, you would have had people, even now, writing to forums and saying, oh, Joan could have taken down Cynthia anytime she liked. She's bigger. That sort of person has to remain like a mystery. Now, when you said Beverly Dunn played her, I was thinking, okay, why can't I remember this character? But now I do remember the fact that we didn't see her. That was quite deliberate.
Because
that we didn't see her.
When Joan had Reb transferred to Blackmore, she rang Cynthia and said, I want you to fix up Reb. I want her put through hell.
Yeah.
You know, it was a favor. So that was really fascinating. And one thing I do want to ask you before we get onto your characters was, now I know you weren't around at the Blackmore time, you know, when started Blackmore. Why would and I don't know if you can answer this, but the writers never used the Cynthia Leach character at Blackmore when they actually went to Blackmore? Why would that be the case?
That would be the case because they would have been duplicating Joan.
Okay.
They would have been, oh, look, here's another prison and here's another freak.
Okay.
So, you know, we do try to make characters individual and not just, I mean, I was very, very big on the fact that there were always going to be, and there still are, people for whom the top dog is B. Smith. And that's because B. Smith was the top dog for 400 episodes, apart from a few weeks when she was out. So you don't, when you're creating a new top dog, you don't say, okay, well, all we need to do is just change the name and cast someone different.
Yeah. Because
you've already seen that top dog. So you need to fashion a different top dog, one that works differently. If we'd seen Cynthia when they went to Blackmore, we would just have been seeing another freak.
Yeah. And then the governor...
And that would have undercut Maggie Kirkpatrick's character. And we didn't want to do that. We were very, very conscious from the moment the freak hit the screen that by that time, which was the late 200s, I think, the people who were driving the show from that point on was not B. Smith. It was Lizzie Birdsworth, because she was our sympathetic character. It was the freak, because she made such an impact and we never knew how far she would go. And it was, to a certain extent, Judy Bryant. But I think Val had already semi-turned off. She was, because it was only in the late 200s when I got the first request to write her out. And it was because she was no longer fully engaged, and she was being quite difficult. I mean, it's an incredibly grueling schedule that they have. I mean, incredibly grueling, sometimes filming 12, 15 hours a day. Yeah. And in the case of B, because of how she was conceived in the first place and how she operated as a top dog, she had poor Love had a lot of repeat scenes. You know, she must have thought, oh shit, I did this in episode 103 and now I'm doing it again. Oh God, how many times can I threaten somebody in the laundry? I mean, that's the nature of the game. But as having been an actress myself, you get very fed up with that after a while. Very, very fed up. But in the case of Cynthia, the decision was made, and we actually consciously realized that we were in danger of recreating the freak.
So is that why characters like Len Murphy and Jock Stewart were only in for a short time, because they were going to take the light off a character like that?
Yeah, they would pull focus. I mean, it was a different situation with them because they were men, and because with Len and Joan, you had the gender power struggle between male and female. And you thought, oh shit, is he going to get the better of her? And also, I have to say, now that was me being a bit of a bitch, getting rid of Len Murphy. In fact, that was me being a lot of a bitch. I loved Maury Fields and Val Gillette, his wife, and my daughter is very good friends with their son, Marty.
Marty, yeah.
However, we were at a prisoner party for, I don't know what it was for, maybe the 500th or whatever. And I had just decided to write Len Murphy out because of the very reasons that we've just discussed. That, you know, the battle then does not become good against evil. It becomes evil against evil between two screws. And the name of the show is Prisoner. It's not Screws. The name of the show is Prisoner. So the focus must always be brought back onto the prisoners. And Maury came to me, and, you know, Maury was in the twilight of his career. And as we all do, liked to big note a little bit, and said to me, you know, they've asked me to stay on, don't you? And I mean, he talked exactly like Len Murphy talked. It was no acting required. You know, they've asked me to stay on, don't you? And I said, really? And he said, oh, yeah, they want me to stay on for another 12 months. Oh. And I thought, you bloody liar. You bloody liar, Maury. I've just been talking to them saying, I think we're in danger with the freak Len Murphy story, and I think it's time for him to go. But I hadn't made up my mind. I mean, they virtually said, well, yeah, you could be right. If you want to let him go, let him go. And it was him telling me that they'd asked him to stay on for another 12 months, which I knew was not true, because I talked to them that very day, that made me say, oh, piss off. And I went back the following week and said, okay, we're writing Len out. So then the question was how he's done so many rotten things. Poetic justice would be to get him out by catching him for something he didn't do.
Wow.
So that was the Len Murphy story. But let me get back onto talking about how and why you create characters for a minute, because that's what this one is about.
Yes. We will talk about Len Murphy in another episode, though.
Yeah, we will. We absolutely will.
Okay.
We're going to talk about him in the next episode when we talk top dogs and nasties, because there are numerous types of characters you can create. Now, the worst thing you can do if you're creating a television show is to say, well, he's a baddie, let's find a name for him and just throw him in there. Or she's the wuss, so let's, you know, get a name that fits like Weeping Willie and throw her in there. It's good if you're doing a one-off or a telemovie, it will work. But if you're doing a long-running series, that can't be how you structure your major characters. So when you're structuring a character, you have to say, first of all, what is the function of this character? Why do we need this character? And if you've got two characters doing exactly the same thing in a show, then one of them is redundant. Then Murphy and the Freak, okay, you can have some fun with the power struggle between them, but after that, they're doing the same thing. One of them's redundant. Which one's it going to be? Well, it's going to be Len, isn't it? Because the Freak is now synonymous with prisoner. So if you've got two characters who fill the same function exactly, one of them doesn't belong and you need to get rid of them. So if we look at characters like, well, let's take youngies for a start. If you look at Marlene, Bobby, Lexi, the three youngest major characters that we had in the show. Now, it would have been easy to say, well, they're young, they're stupid, they got caught, they got to serve their time, and they walk around pretty much doing what Doreen did because they're not too smart. That would be a disservice to the audience, and that would mean that two of them were redundant because all three of them would be doing the same thing. So then when you look at the character, you need to say, you need to find out what's driving them inside. You have to say, what are their wants? What is it they want from life? And what are their needs? What do they need from life? Now, if their wants and needs are the same thing, then you have external conflict that they have to face. If their wants and needs are different, then you have internal conflict because they're fighting against each other. Like, say, if someone wants to be a rock star, or someone wants $1 million, that's what they want. So they go and rob a bank. But what they really need is to be accepted by their parents, and they're not. So the conflict there is inner conflict because they're robbing the bank and winding up in prison just makes them more miserable because it's driven the parents further away. So when we looked at those three characters, we said, number one, they've got to have totally different backgrounds. Once you decide what their wants and needs are, they've got to have totally different backgrounds. And in that, you then automatically, if you make them from a different class, they live in different types of suburbs. There's, you know, Lexi was always more middle class, if you like. Rabbit came from a loving Aussie home where her conflict was because she was overweight. People, a lot of me in Rabbit, I have to say, a lot of that fighting for acceptance.
So that's our first character. So Marlene Warren, played by Genevieve Lemon. So she arrived in episode 461 on the 19th of June, 84. So, yeah, where was the creation of Marlene? Where
was the creation of Marlene? Okay, there was actually a friend of my daughter's. I can't remember her name. I'm not sure that she was a friend, or I think it was a he actually, who went to the same school as my youngest daughter. And he was about 14, 15. And he just mucking around, trying to be the center of attention, trying to get, look at me, look at me, look at me, went with a group of kids and threw a rock off a bridge on a motorway, and it went through the windscreen of the car, and the car crashed. And the driver was injured. And this kid was sent to juvenile detention centre. Incidentally, I always wanted to do, as a spin-off, I always wanted to do a show called Chains, which was about kids in juvenile detention centre, and to use Tina Arena's song Chains as the, do you remember that song?
Yeah.
I'm in chains, that one. Always wanted to use that as the theme song, and do sort of like a Home and Away with teenagers, but set in a juvenile detention centre. But it never originated. And so we had to make Marlene a little bit older to make her come into prison. The idea was with Marlene was to create a character who was basically, she was a good kid. She wasn't, the brightest, light bulb in the box, but she was basically a decent kid with a decent family who'd made this bloody stupid mistake of saying, look at me, look at me, look at me, because she wasn't one of the pretty girls. I actually think that Genevieve makes up in personality for anything she might have had. And there's an interesting, was it you who put up, oh no, it was on one of the prisoner forums, an article about Genevieve Lemon as she was going into prisoner. She wasn't that fat. She was a little bit plump. And the headline says roly-poly, which you would never be allowed to say now. Sometimes political correctness is okay. But, she was seen as, oh, she's coming in to play the fat girl because we don't have a fat girl. And so she's a replacement for Doreen Burns. She was never a replacement for Doreen. I don't think Marlene was anything like Doreen, but that's just me, of course. And I wanted someone who we could see, is prison going to taint them and change them into someone nasty, or are they going to be able to stay and see it through and come out the other side wiser and still a good kid? Now, the thing about Marlene is that she made rash decisions because she'd make them on the spur of the moment. She'd never think things through. She'd just do it. And then afterwards, because it was all about, oh, I'm craving some attention. And so that was why, when we knew we were going to lose Marlene, we gave her the marriage to the lovely Peter Bensley, yes, who was at the time a huge heartthrob on Australian television. I mean, 40 years ago, Peter Bensley was, whoa, oh, isn't he gorgeous? Isn't he lovely?
Was that your idea to bring the men into the prison?
No, it wasn't. It was the idea of one of my storyliners called Alistair Webb.
Alistair Webb, yep.
And I have to be honest, I think it was the only idea of Alistair's that we ever used in the 2 or 3 years that he was a storyliner. He was very good on details and keeping us on track with, well, hang on, we did that before, we can't do that now. But he wasn't what we call story generative. But we said, we need something big. I can't remember what episode the guys came in. Can you remember, Matt? Do you know offhand when the guys came in?
I can't actually remember exactly. I can look it up, though.
It would be late 400s, I think.
Yeah.
Mid to late 400s, I think. But he said, what about if we put the men in prison? And I said, well, don't be ridiculous. We couldn't. And he said, oh, but I read something about...
Episode 499, the men...
Oh, okay. All right. Well, there you go. And he said, I read something in America about a prison burning down, and they had to, you know, send the male prisoners somewhere else. And some of them actually went to solitary in a women's prison. And I said, really? Well, that's interesting. No internet back there, remember?
Yes.
Back then, remember?
No Google.
No Google to check it out. So he said, couldn't we do that? And I said, yes, we could, but what's the point? What is the point? If we put 3 guys, what is the point? And his idea at that time, which wasn't necessarily a bad idea, but again, it was putting the storytelling into the hands of guests, was, well, they break out of solitary and they take over the prison. Not a bad idea.
Wow.
Not a bad idea at all. And in fact, you're nodding your head and smiling and thinking,
I like that idea. I can see that.
Yeah, for about 2 episodes.
Yeah.
About 2 episodes. And you can't bring people in just to service the story for 2 episodes and then piss them off again. What's the point? The other thing you do when you're creating a character is you say to yourself and your story team or whatever, what's our emotional investment in this person? How are we invested in them? What do we want for them? Because if we are not emotionally engaged with a character, why are we watching? We watched the freak because we wanted her to get her comeuppance in the end. We watch any one of those characters because of the ending that we want for them. Now, sometimes we don't get it, but if we're not invested in those characters, and we'll talk about Pixie in a minute because she's one that is very contentious because of the ending that she got. But in Marlene's case, we said, what is the best thing? Because when she gets out, she's going to a loving family. And in here, she has been accepted for who she is, but she's still going to face the problem when she gets out that she's not thin enough, she's not pretty enough. This whole image shaming thing, which thank goodness, the one thing that political correctness has done is stopped us from doing that to a large degree. However, that doesn't mean it no longer exists. Of course it bloody does. Of course it does. And to a certain degree, you have to learn to live with it. I'm not sure if I told this story, but I was in an art gallery on one day in Melbourne, and there was a woman looking at pictures, and she had about 5-year-old little boy with her. And he said quite loudly, "Mummy, look at the fat lady," and pointed to me.
Oh my God.
And she immediately smacked him and said, "You don't ever say that in front of people. You don't call people fat." And I turned around and I said, "Why are you slapping him when he is telling the truth? I am fat. You think I don't know I'm fat? At that stage, I was several sizes bigger than I am now." And she said, "Yeah, but he shouldn't have said it. It's bad manners and it's this." And I said, "So what you're doing really is you're punishing him for telling the truth. And you're going to encourage him to lie from now on." And she said, "No, I'm just not going to let him say things like that." Now, I have the same argument with my daughters even now, that they think he should not have said it. Whereas I think you don't teach a child to lie.
I agree with he shouldn't have said it. So I disagree with you there.
But he did say it.
No, I know he did say it. Yeah.
You don't punish him for saying it. What you do is you say, that may be true, but you don't say that to somebody because it's not nice, it's not good manners. You don't punish the child. You explain to him why it's not right. Now, Marlene would have gone back to being called roly-poly or, dustbin. That was my nickname when I was younger, was dustbin, because people used to say, "Oh, you must go out and eat what's in the dustbins to get fat." Geez. I know, that's the world that it was back in the 50s. So I wanted to give Marlene an ending that someone would fall in love with her and not see a fat girl in a prison uniform, would see someone who was funny and genuine and delightful and caring, all the things that Rabbit was, apart from her size. And the thing was to give her the best looking guy she was ever going to meet in her life and have them get married on screen. That marriage did a lot for overweight women everywhere.
Yeah.
I mean, now we see wedding pictures of women who are ginormous. I was watching The Voice semi-finals and saw that this very, very, very big girl who is Polynesian, I think, who is just the most amazing singer.
I just saw the rerun of that this morning before we come on. Her voice.
Yeah.
I turned around.
Her voice is astonishing.
Yes.
But she had never had the belief in herself to get up and sing because of how she looked. And that's truly appalling. Yeah. So in Rabbit's case, we said, here's a good person. She deserves a good outcome.
So on saying she deserves a good outcome, so would you say the 3 male inmates were brought into the show to close some of those long-term characters off, like Marlene?
No, they were, to be perfectly honest, they... When the idea was mooted, it was just a short-term story, as I said, to have them break out of solitary, take over the prison. But then I thought, okay, who might be impacted by men coming into the prison? Who might? Myra, from memory, was betrayed by her husband. And so to find a guy that she really, really cared about, but it was it was star-crossed lovers. It could never be.
It was never going to be anything, was it? Ever?
It was never going to be. But for a little while, she could make believe that she was outside and life was normal, and she could fall in love.
Do you think there's real people like that in real life that know a relationship isn't going to work, but they still try and believe it?
Absolutely. There are many of those in real life, and that's the, people say, oh, that story's pretty incredible. And in every single case where someone has said to me a story is just too incredible to believe, it has been a case that it's happened to someone somewhere at some time, and I know about it either firsthand or I know about it through reading about it or whatever. Very, very few things that happen in real life don't also happen in art or fiction. Truth is stranger than fiction. When I was doing the story of Leah being surrogate mother for Sally's baby, on Home and Away, and it turns out she's having twins, but they're not identical twins, and only one of them is Sally's baby and the other one is Leah's baby.
Wow.
And one of those babies gets sick. Whose baby is it? People said, oh, you can't have, a woman can't get pregnant with 2 children from 2 different. Yes, they can. Medically they can. I rang up and checked, and yes, they can. Because I knew I'd heard it somewhere, and yes, they can. So very often we were at the forefront. We reported things which people didn't know about because they weren't general knowledge. But Marlene deserved that happy ending. Okay, she had to wait to be released, but she had someone who adored her. She didn't have to go back to being the roly-poly girl who couldn't get a date, and so that thus was a tomboy. I drew on Marlene when I played Consuela in Arcade, even though, I drew on Consuela in Arcade when I created Marlene, because Arcade came first, of course. And the thing about them in Arcade was that they thought it was funny to have a fat girl in love with the skinny guy. And I said, well, there has to be more to them than that. That can't just be it. She can't just be a fat girl, and he can't just be a skinny guy. And I think I told you that's where they said round about week 6, she's the daughter of a bearded lady and a lion tamer in the circus. And I said, no, she's not. She's a tomboy with a bunch of brothers from the western suburbs, because that's, if you wanted her to be that, you should have created her as that. If we don't create the characters properly, then the actors are going to create them for us. And that's a danger, because then we who are creating their stories don't know how the actors are going to be playing them. So in Marlene's case, decent girl, she was not replicating Lexi or Bobby. Bobby gets a happy ending. What are Bobby's wants and needs? Bobby's wants are to be part of a family that loves her. Bobby's needs are to be part of a family that loves her. So wants and needs are the same thing, which means she can deal with conflict that comes from the outside, but what she wants and needs, what's driving her inner journey, are the same things. And that was the chance to do the Stan the Man story, which a lot of people are very, very fond of that story.
Oh, definitely, yes.
And Bobby gets a happy ending. She finds her family. She finds her home. They're not blood relatives, but they, again, accept her for who she is. And she finds she has a talent for doing electrics. And, you know, everyone has a talent. I think I've said this before. Look at Ken now with his painting and his writing and years. So Eva, look at you. I bet you didn't start out thinking that this is what you'd be doing. You probably, in your 20s, had very clear ideas of where you were going and what you were going to do. And it probably didn't include doing Talking Prisoner.
No, I wanted to be a lawyer.
Wanted to be a weirdo?
A lawyer.
Oh, a lawyer. Oh, you wanted to be a lawyer.
I wanted to be a lawyer, but I was bullied at school, so I couldn't wait to get out of school. So I didn't. That's another story.
But that is very interesting, because your interest in the law presumably came from the idea of, why do people commit crimes?
Yes.
Where is the justice in the world? All of those things led you.
That's a whole podcast.
Lawyer, exactly, to doing podcasts about people who have faced either justice or injustice. I mean, to me, if someone gets what's coming to them, it's not an unhappy ending. But sometimes someone gets something coming to them which they don't deserve.
That's
now,
true.
Pixie is a case in point.
Well, hang on. I want to go back one step before we get on.
Okay.
Just two things with Marlene. Okay. First of all, I know you see some of the comments in some of the Facebook prisoner groups. Marlene is one of those characters that fans are divided on, that they either
absolutely
love her,
and in fact most of the ones we're talking about are ones that they either love or hate.
What are your thoughts on fans that love or hate a character? They think that character shouldn't have been born.
Do you know what my psychology head tells me it is?
I'm ready.
The people that hate a character recognize something in that character that they don't like about themselves.
Okay.
And the people that love and are drawn to a character, they are either drawn to the character because they want to be like that character, or they recognize something in the character that is also part of their trait. So it's a connection. It's always a connection or a disconnect. And we talk about that all the time. But, but as I said, if you don't have a range of different characters who don't just have different names, if 2 or 3 or more of them are doing exactly the same bloody thing, then you haven't got the right mix. You can get rid of them. You can get rid of 1, 2, or more, and no one is going to notice that they're gone. That's why you have to say, what is driving them? What is it they want? And how could they get it? Yeah. And is that in fact what they need, or do they need something entirely different? Now, in Marlene's case, she needed validation. That's what she needed. She needed validation. She got it from her mother, but we all say at some time or another, well, she's my mother. She has to love me. You know, that comes with the territory. She wanted validation for being herself. And she got that when a terrifically good-looking young man fell in love with her. Yeah. He didn't fall in love with any of the other women in the prison. He fell in love with the dumpy girl because what he needed was truth. He needed an honest person in his life. Yep. Someone who'd support him and be open and honest with him and never bullshit him. And he found that in Marlene.
And you wrote the vows for the wedding as well.
I did write the vows for the wedding. And the funny thing is that when I married Beloved in 2004, we planned to write the vows for our wedding. And it was so hectic because the wedding was at our house and I ended up doing everything. And I said, I'm not paying $500 for wedding flowers. Because the only other job I've ever had, apart from being in show business, is I was a florist for a short amount of time. Oh, really? So I bought all the flowers in bunches and I made all the bouquets for the wedding. And I'm here to tell you they were spectacular. So, but we were meant to write our own vows and we got to the wedding day and realized we hadn't done it. So I drew on some of those vows that I had written for Marlene and Matt.
Oh, really?
I promise to be your best mate. I promise if you need a shoulder to cry on, I'm going to be there. And, you know, because I hadn't Beloved, who had no time at all, just said, thank you for finding me.
Wow.
Because he'd lost track of who he was as a person. He was a drummer, and he's 2 wives before me had made him put his drum kits out in the garage. Oh, you can't have that in the house, and you can't play drums in the house. And I said, why not? You know, you can play drums in the house. Set him up over there. He actually played drums at our wedding reception.
Oh, amazing.
We had a great band, and he sat down and played drums. But yeah, I did write the vows, and the switchboards were jammed when that episode, Channel 10 switchboard was jammed, and Grundy's switchboard was jammed with requests for those vows.
Really?
So if there is anybody out there who in fact requested those vows for their own wedding, please get in touch with me. I would love to hear from you. Yes. I really would love to hear from you. But it was a good wedding. It was a lovely wedding. And if you remember, there was a bittersweet moment with Myra and Jeff together when Marlene and Matt are saying their vows, where they realise that they're never going to be able to make those vows. But it's a tacit understanding that if they could, they would. And it was a really I love the sweet romantic moments in Prisoner, because otherwise it's just doom and gloom the whole bloody time. Yeah. And pretty depressing.
Definitely.
You got any more on Marlene, or?
No, that was it. So are we going to do Pixie or Lexi next?
Let's do Lexi because it's a little bit shorter.
All right. So
sorry, I missed that. Could you say it again, please?
Oh, hang on. I haven't switched my mobile off. Sorry, Siri. Nothing, thank you.
Now, Lexi Patterson first appeared in episode 509 and was played by Peppy Trevor, who I've actually become quite good friends with in the last 6 months. She's a great lady.
She is great.
Yeah, and I'll connect you two soon because, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so when can
she told me now her mum, who we all know is Mari Trevor, one of the producers on the show. Mari, a lot of people think that Mari got Pepe the part on Prisoner.
No, she didn't.
Mari
No,
had
she
no
didn't.
idea that she was coming on.
And in fact, once we decided that Pepe was the person, Mari was a little bit the same way I was when Grundy said they wanted Kelly to come into the storyline department because she was just so good. And I said, well, I'm having nothing to do with it. Thank you very much. I'm not going to be accused of nepotism. But if you want to, you hire her. But I'm going to be harder on her than I would be on somebody else probably. And Mari said, oh, shit, don't do this. Don't, you know. And we said, look, she's the best person. She's the best person to play this role. And she said, yeah, but everybody's going to say that it was because of me and blah. And Mari was not really happy about it. She was thrilled for Pepe, but she was not happy about the fact that she said, you know what, wait until I finish my producing stint and then get her in it. Now,
so what do you say to all the people on, particularly on Facebook, that say she only got that part because of Mari?
Bullshit. Yes. I say to them, as I've said to you before, cast your mind back 40 odd years. Thank you, people. This is not now. Don't bring your 2000, 2010, 2020 judgments to something you know absolutely nothing about. If I'm telling you it, it's true. Because I get into trouble. A lot of people get into trouble for telling lies. I get into trouble for always telling the truth. And that pisses some people off. There is no way in the world where, in fact, I'm not even sure that when we signed off on Pepe that I realized she was Mari Trevor's daughter. I think it was after that Jan Russ probably said to me, you know she's Mari's daughter, don't you? And I, in fact, said, Mari who? So bullshit, folks. Stop writing stuff you don't know anything about. Either watch the show and enjoy it or don't watch it. Either way, it's your choice. But don't put your own projections onto characters and history that doesn't exist. What we wanted out of Lexi was a smart girl, a really smart with it. You've got to remember that when she came in the Boy George gear, Boy George... Whose
idea was it for Boy George? But now Boy George is a fan of Prisoner. I do know that. I've read that.
Boy George is a fan of Prisoner, and I've never had a chance to talk to him. The idea was mine, but it came from the fact that my daughter, Kelly, used to do the Boy George get-up and was a huge Boy George fan. And I think the two first songs, but they took a while to take off here. I can't remember which order they came in.
The Culture Club song.
Were Karma Chameleon.
Yes.
And Do You Really Want to Hurt Me?
Yes.
And Kelly was, because Kelly had a stint as a pop singer, as I had a stint as a pop singer back in 1962.
What was your stage name?
Coral Kelly.
Coral Kelly.
Coral Kelly. And she was one half of a techno duo called Cripsex, which won Best Indie Group 1 year in the early 80s when she was, or the late 70s even. But I thought that's a good look. But that in that time, part of the argument about Boy George was, can we actually afford to have an openly gay pop idol? And that was the records were out for a while and they didn't get airplay and it looked like they might not. But in the finish, it was just so good. Young George O'Dowd was so good that, you know, they had to play the records. And he himself decided that the more outrageous he could be, the more he would create a stir. So it wasn't your average bogan who was drawn to Boy George and Culture Club. I mean, it's in the name of the group, Culture Club.
Oh, it's great music. I love it.
Great music, but it appealed to people with a little bit up here. It appealed to people who were thinking people. And we hadn't had someone who was really smart but an underachiever before. And that was where the character of Lexi came in.
Oh, okay.
And a lot of people, and there'll be people who still don't to this day understand why we didn't use the nickname all that often. But when she came in, she got called Banjo. And she got called Banjo because, of course, the most famous Australian poet is Banjo Paterson, A.B. Paterson, otherwise known as Banjo Paterson. So because her name was Paterson, we called her Banjo. When we started getting letter after letter after letter saying, we don't understand what's banjo, we realized that not all of the people who watch Prisoner would understand a cultural reference. Yeah. And we've got two cultural references. We've got Boy George and we've got Banjo Paterson. So we started dropping the name. We didn't use it as much. Yeah. But because Peppy herself is such a smart person, I mean, even when she was very young, and I think she was only 20 odd when she came into Prisoner, she was super smart, and you knew that she was super smart. You could see it in the audition. And I wanted someone super smart. So the audition had some ideas in it, which were smart ideas, to see whether or not she could sell them. And that's why we were able to pair her with people like Anita Selby and have her say, you know, how can you be a Catholic when they did this, this, and this? And she could express opinions which were outside the norm. So you always had the sense that although something had gone really wrong, she came from a family of opportunities. She'd stuffed it up somehow and, you know, done stupid things, as we all do when we're young. But you always got the sense that where Marlene came from a down-to-earth, good Aussie, salt-of-the-earth family, Lexi came from, even her name, because although she was never called anything else, Lexi was short for Alexis. Now, you don't name your daughter Alexis Patterson unless you're probably upper middle class. Alexis is not a name that working class people give to their children. Now, I know that sounds trite in this day and age, but you've got to remember what the traditions of mores were 40 years ago. And the mere fact that she called herself Lexi, which was a shortened version of Alexis, the mere fact that she had been christened Alexis meant that there were certain expectations on her, that she came from a better than average family, and that she was smart. And so she fulfilled a niche for us, which we didn't have with anybody else. Most people were just trying to survive. Lexi wasn't. Lexi was an opportunist. She was looking for ways that she could make prison actually work for her. I mean, of all of them, Lexi would have been the one who got out of prison, became a CEO of a corporate empire, and wrote a book, My Years Behind Bars. That's, you know, that's what you imagine she would probably have done. So she was not like anybody else. Yeah. And we've talked a little bit about Bobby. She was not like anybody else. She craved to be loved by someone, anyone, anybody. And so when Stan the man provided a new family for her, she got what she wanted and needed. So she got her wants and needs. Yeah.
Now, going back on Lexi for a moment. Now, storylines is one thing we will talk about in the future because there's a lot that you wrote. But the one where Lexi escaped because Lou Kelly thought Lexi was the Phantom Lagger, and Lexi ends up hiding out in a brothel run by Mabel Morgan, played by Val Gillet. So we've got the Val Gillet connection to Maury there.
What episode? What episode?
I can't remember the episode number, but it was, you know, when they had Lexi escape. Were you still there then, The Phantom
I
Lane.
don't think I was there.
Oh, you weren't
I
there?
don't think I was there. I think that might have been, end of the 500s into the early 600s.
Maybe. I'd have to look it up. But they had they had her escape and she was hiding out in a brothel, and they had the bent cop that was killing all the
I can't imagine that would have been a story of mine. I can't imagine, because and if it was, I must have been having a bad day, because as you're telling it to me, I'm thinking utter crap.
I'm gonna look it up, because now I'm curious to know.
Okay, so I'll keep talking while you're
talking. I'm researching.
Okay, I want to talk just a little bit about.
Okay, it was episode 602.
Nothing to do with me.
Okay.
And I would never, ever have done that story. It's absolute bullshit. The person least likely in the entire show to have wound up hiding out, was she working in the brothel?
They tried to get her to work because she had to pay her way. But, yeah.
The last place in the world that Lexi would have wound up would have been in a brothel. She's more likely to have blackmailed one of her parents' friends, or even her parents for that matter, but she would not have wound up in a brothel. No way. As soon as you were talking about it, I was thinking, please God, let that not be me, because it's such a crap storyline. Have you got Reb on that list?
Yeah, I do. Now, I'm just looking at time. So we've got
I know, and I think Reb's going to be... We're going to have to, through the ones that we do as we're going along.
Yeah, I'll make notes and keep the ones that we need to discuss. So,
yeah, but I
want to get
just
to Reb?
want to talk about Reb for a minute, because in the...
Sorry, I didn't quite...
Oh, for God's sake, go away, Siri.
Now, Reb,
because I'm keeping my eye on them.
Played by Janet Andrew Arthur, first appeared in episode 422 on the 16th of February, 1984. So where did the idea for Reb come from?
She was one of my favourite characters, and she came... You know how sometimes you see something and you think, oh, wow, that's fantastic. I had just re-watched James Dean.
James Dean. I'm going to ask you about that.
James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause. And the thing about, at that time, when I was a teenager, when teenagers first got the name teenagers, they weren't called teenagers until the late 1950s. And then they suddenly started getting their own clothing styles, their own music. Before that, while I was growing up, they were just mini adults. That's all. They were mini me's. And Rebel Without a Cause was such a huge breakout movie in the 1950s, because here was this kid who was basically suffering from what we call later being an in-between. He wasn't a kid and he wasn't an adult anymore. And he just wanted to hit a wall or punch somebody because he was so frustrated with everything. Yeah. And James Dean was absolutely 100% the role model for Reb Keane. Stolen, lock, stock and barrel, even to the point of poor Janet Andrew Arthur having her waist-length, beautiful hair cut off short, boy style.
Cut it for the role.
She had to have it cut because I had said, again, one credit for one thing to Alistair Webb. Gee, I'm crediting with two things in one day. He suggested...
That's enough credits.
Yeah, he's the one who suggested that she should always have a comb and always be combing this quiff, because not only had James Dean done it in Rebel Without a Cause, but in the 60s, which my storyliners were very young in the 60s, there had been an iconic show called 77 Sunset Strip. And in this show, which you'll probably find if you search for it, in this show called 77 Sunset Strip, which was about the two detectives on the Sunset Strip in Los Angeles, there was this character played by an actor called Ed Burns, who was just called Cookie. That was his name, was Cookie, K-O-O-K-I-E, and that actually went into the vernacular, that meaning sort of quirky. And for many years, we talked about things being kooky. Oh, that's a little bit kooky. And the thing about him was that his character was also inspired by Rebel Without a Cause, and he always had a comb and combed the quiff in his hair. He had hair like Elvis Presley, and he was always combing it. And Alistair Webb said it would be great if she had a comb that she's always getting out and combing her hair. So we gave that to Reb. There was even a hit song, you can look it up. I think it was, I can't remember who sang it. There was even a hit top 10 song called Cookie, Lend Me Your Comb.
Really?
And it went, Cookie, Cookie, lend me your comb. Cookie, Cookie, I'm all alone. And then it had Ed Burns, 20, 30 years before rap came into being, would talk his part. He would say, I'm just going down to the club and I'm hoping to meet with so-and-so. And then the girls would come in again and sing, Cookie, Cookie, lend me your comb.
Because
So,
in the 70s and 80s in Australia and in Melbourne in particular, for men, it was the tight white T-shirt, the cigarettes up on the shoulders, and the black comb, in the back of the tight jeans, the Brill cream in the hair, and that was it. Yeah. So
now we're probably going to have to finish with this one, but we will get on to more. But can I ask, back on my soapbox again, sometimes I have really great ideas and I use them, but I forget where I've used them. And one of these, you might know the answer immediately. If not, I'm hoping that somebody watching this will tell me. I thought it was a story that I gave to Reb in Prisoner. But now I'm thinking maybe it was in something else because I never hear anybody talk about it. And it was such a big deal at the time. Somebody does something wrong and people want to get back at her, and they put a block of red paint in the shower head. They unscrew the shower head and put a block of, there used to be blocks of watercolor paints that you had in kindergartens for kids to play with. They put the block in there, and so when the water comes through in the shower, it comes through red as if it's blood and goes all over them. Now, was it a Prisoner story? Was it Reb? Was it a story I did in another show? I cannot for the life of me remember.
I remember something
where I did it. Does it ring any bells with you, Matt?
Sort of does, but I can't remember. I'll have a look.
Because it's like I've never heard anybody on any Prisoner forum
talk about it.
And yet I know that I did it. So whether it was a scene,
one of the fans will let us know, though. They investigate.
Yeah, I mean, it may have been a scene that was cut out because in those days it was considered too gruesome. That may have been the case. And in fact, I found quite recently a scene was cut out because, and it just went, oh, it was the finding of one of the David Hedges bodies, which it was shot, but it was never included because the body was supposed to have been there for weeks. And, you know, somebody wrote recently, oh, they never found so-and-so's body. And I said, yes, they did. But the scene was cut because the body makeup had made it look like quite disgusting. And they said, oh, no, cut that. So
going back to Reb, though, was she ever considered to be a long-term top dog?
No.
No.
In fact, I would never have made her top dog because part of the qualities.
I know she took over for Myra for a little bit, and then
a little bit, yeah.
But that was it. But she was never considered
part
to
of
be
the qualities of a top dog has to be, whether you like it as top dog or not, that you take on the responsibility for all those other prisons. That you are basically the hero. and of the story. And that means that you have to put those women, the welfare of those women, before yourself. And Red was someone who was always looking after herself.
Yeah.
And so she would not have made a long-term top dog. Neither would Lou Kelly have made a long-term top dog. You know, there are people who, I mean, Myra could bash the living daylights out of someone, but she was still a compassionate person. She was you know, if something bad was done to you, she'd say, don't worry, I'll sort it out. And she would.
Yeah.
And she did not bash people for no reason. She was a heavy when people deserved a heavy. And I always felt, and Annie Phelan played her that way, that she got no joy out of having to do it.
That's someone. Yeah.
I might tell you, just to end on a sensational note, because this is something also which I don't think I've ever told anywhere. Talking about characters, we talked about the three men, but we never talked about Frank Burke. We wanted to have an arsehole, an absolute arsehole. And we wanted to have him betray his fellow prisoners by getting them all in so much trouble. So we had the rape of Pixie. We haven't got on to Pixie, so we will talk about Pixie another time.
Yeah.
But the punishment originally, you may remember that they branded Frank with a cigarette in the center of his forehead. That was not to have been his punishment. His punishment, and I had got as far as scripting it before Grundy's pulled the plug and said, you simply cannot go that far. He was to be caught in the shower room and anally raped with a broom handle. That was to have been Frank Burke's punishment.
Wow.
See how it feels, Frankie. Whoosh.
Wow.
Straight up. And I said to Grundy's, we don't need to see anything. You know, we can just see the pain on his face, no preparation, and somebody shoves a broom handle up here. And it was Myra who did it. And then I had said, we just explain it in the following scene by having somebody say to Myra, geez, I hope you disinfected that broom handle before I have to do the corridors. That is how the story should have gone. Now, would it have been better? I don't know.
I
Maybe
love that.
not.
That, you know, it's funny. That was back in the 80s that you come up with that storyline. That was the storyline that was used in the early 2000s of The Sopranos with a gay mafia captain. Now, I interviewed Joseph Ganascoli, who I've become friends with. He played a gay mafia captain called Vito Spatafor. His ending on the show was a pool cue shoved up his, you know what, and he died on the show. But they didn't actually show the pool cue going in the anal. It was just.
Well, I did it first, and it was a broom handle, which is marginally thicker than a pool cue. And Grundy's just chickened out on it.
Wow.
They chickened out. They would not let me do it. And I thought the following line, I hope you've disinfected that broom handle before I have to do the corridors. I thought, well, that takes the heat off it because people will giggle nervously at that. And he won't be able to walk. But somebody justified it late, and so I came up with the branding. And somebody said later, don't you think the branding was better because he's going to have that scar for the whole of his life? But they wouldn't have seen what was done with the broom handle. They could have, you know, he needn't have told anybody about that. But no, I don't. I think the right punishment for raping anybody is rape them back. And I still think that, which means I won't.
How did you feel as someone creative as yourself coming up with that storyline, which is I think much better storyline? Getting told no, you can't do that. It
happened to me so often that I kind of got used to it. And I thought there are some battles that you fight and some battles that you don't fight. I'm not sure if I just told you between us or whether I mentioned it when I did Home and Away. The plan was for Angie to actually physically and have an affair with the kid who she tries to set up for her rape, who's a lovely boy, Chris, whatever his name was, Evans, I think, but I can't remember what the character's name was. And, he was to be like, oh, wow, I'm having it off with the teacher. He's 16 and here he is getting his rocks off with this really good-looking woman who's teaching him what it's all about. And they just said, we can't do it because it is abuse of a child, which it technically it was in 2002, and it still is the law. If you're under 16, that's the law. Even if they agree to it, it's abuse of a child. And the woman the teacher in America, who had an affair with a 13-year-old male student, and got pregnant with his child, and actually had his child, she went to prison for about 5 years. And when she came out, they got married and they had more children and they lived, as they say, happily ever after. Wow. So, it's really, because I like to ask why, it's interesting to look at that and say, what purpose did it serve sending her to prison? He was part of it. In fact, he initiated it and she went along with it. And despite the fact that it sounds impossible, she's in her early 30s and he's 13, they fell in love. They were in love. And the proof of that is they're still married, they've got kids. It's a lifetime commitment. Isn't that better than two people who are not, underage, who have it off for the wrong reasons and get married and are divorced a year later? So, it's whatever your moral compass tells you. My moral compass always guided me in saying that's the way the story should go for the maximum impact of the story, but also for the truth of the story. Yeah. If I were those women in prison, I would have shoved that broom handle up Frank Burke's bum.
And speaking of Frank, yeah, definitely. And I agree with you. But speaking of Frank Burke, I know you got to go, but Trevor Kent, did you ever meet Trevor, the actor?
Trevor is the loveliest man. Trevor was an openly gay man who I think did die of HIV complications, AIDS complications. A gentleman you could never hope to meet. Which
How did he feel about the storyline?
Pardon?
How did he feel about the storyline, the rape storyline?
He didn't mind it at all. He's a fine actor. And I totally believed he raped Pixie. I totally believed it when I saw his performance. But the reason that I wanted him to play that role was because I had seen him play Frankenfurter in the Rocky Horror Show live. Wow. And I thought, this guy can do anything. He is that good an actor, and he was that good an actor, and he was charming. And all he said to me was, "Darling, you're not going to actually show me doing it, are you?" And I said, "No, I'm not." And he said, "Well, that's all right then, isn't it? That's all right. I shall just act." Which was all we needed from him. But he was a charming, lovely man. I tell you what, he would have said, yes, go for the broom handle story. He would have said. But, I think I had, well, maybe I still do, a lot more balls than some of the television executives. Some people would say I still have.
I love that storyline. And he played that part so well. I mean, he was so scary.
He was really, really scary. And when I say to you, he was a very soft-spoken, very nicely spoken, very softly spoken, very gentle man. For him to play that role the way he did just shows how great an actor he is. Whereas there are other actors who, I can tell you, just basically playing themselves. And so,
You know who I love as an actor. I just recently watched two. I mean, I've seen these movies before, but I've rewatched them. Was Don's Party and Malcolm with John Hargraves. I mean, what an
John
actor.
Hargraves, another openly gay man who died of AIDS, unfortunately. Another lovely, lovely actor. Have you watched any episodes of Young Ramsey?
Oh, love Young Ramsey. Love it.
Young Ramsey is terrific.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, you've obviously seen Don's Party, I'm assuming, yeah?
Oh, many, many times.
What a great movie.
It is a really good. That was when we made movies that actually had a structure to them and had something to say. And, playwrights often make great screenwriters. Not always, but often they do.
Yeah.
And many, many films have been made of David Williamson's plays. And at the worst, they're always entertaining. At the best, they're bloody bonza, mate.
Yeah.
That's my soapbox for this particular.
Amazing. I love what we just found out about Frank Burke, the storyline, and I'm sure the fans are going to love it. And this has been great as always. And I'm looking forward.
Do please let me know, guys, if you remember the red paint in the shower head, because if that was cut, I'm going to be so pissed off, because I'd like to do an episode down the track a little bit. Let's do nasties and top dogs next time, and we'll cover some of the people that
I'm keeping notes for the ones we didn't get to discuss. So
okay, but also I'd love to do one on shows and stories that fail and why. Definitely. And we can include some of the stories that never made it to air, like the Edna Pearson story, and the story that I told you about the trans person who was put in a male prison because you couldn't change your gender on your birth certificate in those days, and was then transferred to Wentworth. We'll talk about why the Michael Cormack going inside as disguised as a female didn't work, which we talked about, and you hadn't realized that was the original intention. So there'll be a lot of things which...
And that Edna Parsons story is a whole nother episode in itself, especially that story. And Vivian Gray and the actress Vivian Gray herself has got another story behind that. Yeah. So looking forward to it.
Just unfortunate that I used to read the newspapers in those days. Otherwise, I would never have known about the very charming lady who was accused of trying to poison her husband in Adelaide.
I took my daughter to the State Library in Melbourne yesterday. I'm not sure if you saw it on Facebook. And I showed her what a newspaper. She was, what is this? What's... I said, that's how news was delivered back in the day. That's how we found out.
And that's where we got our stories. There was none of this. I mean, now I could just say, Siri, find me an interesting murder story.
And you probably remember the days of the Herald, where they came out twice a day. You had the morning edition, and then you had the afternoon.
And the afternoon edition. Yeah. No Google, no internet.
Love it.
No smartphones, no nothing. So pull your head in, millenniums, and try to time travel. One of my favorite movies of all time is Back to the Future with Michael J. Fox. I love that film. I just love it. So
what's your favorite? 1, 2, or 3? Which one did you like?
One is my favorite. One is my favorite. Getting in that DeLorean, which everyone knew was going to be a bomb, was just back then was absolutely brilliant. But the thing is, suspend disbelief. Don't put your own spin on things. Try to look at things with new eyes, not just when you're watching this show and listening to actresses talk about their heyday, but try to look at things in the world with new eyes. Nothing is new. All there is perception, how we see it. And we don't control anything except our own reaction. So if you broaden your horizons, make your reactions wider, you'll get a lot more enjoyment out of watching a 40-year-old show than just saying, oh, they made a mistake there. Stuff the mistakes. We don't care. You're still freaking watching. See you soon.
See ya. I'll see you soon. Bye.